Hey everyone, welcome. So guess what? We're reading Martin Heidegger's Metaphysics. He was a German philosopher, quite brilliant, quite nerdy. So let's dig in. Alright, we're on paragraph 109, okay? Towards the bottom. Of course, there are now books with the title, What is the Human Being? But this question merely stands in letters on the book's cover. The question is not asked, and not just because one has simply forgotten to ask questions in the midst of so much book writing, but because one already possesses an answer to the question, and an answer that at the time says that one is not allowed to ask at all. If someone believes the proposition expresses by the dogma of the Catholic Church, that is the individual's affair and is not at issue here. But if one puts the question, what is the human being, on the cover of one's books, even though one is not questioning because one does not want to question and cannot do so, this is a procedure that has forfeited in advance every right to be taken seriously. And when, for example, the Frankfurt Zeitung then praises such a book, in which a question is asked solely on the cover as an extraordinary, magnificent, and courageous book, it is clear even to the blindest where we stand. Maybe he's contending that if such a book even has to be written, then we are truly lost, because maybe there's more to discovering that than just what's compiled within a book. Maybe. Why am I mentioning irrelevant things here in the connection with the interpretations of Parmenides' saying? I don't know, Heidegger. It's like knows exactly what I'm thinking. I'm like, just get to the point. In itself, this sort of scribbling is certainly inconsequential and meaningless. But what is not meaningless is the crippling of all passion for questioning. So, what is not meaningless? Crippling your passions to question. A crippling that has already held us back too long. This condition confuses all standards and all stances. Most of us no longer know where and between what alternatives the authentic decision must be made. The authentic decision. Authentic decision. If the greatness of historical willing is to be united with the newness and originality of historical knowing, indications such as those we have given can only point to how far questioning has receded from us as a fundamental happening of historical being. So, the questioning of being, the question of what is a human being, fundamentals and history of being, historical being. But even the understanding of the question has already slipped through our fingers. So let us now offer the essential points of orientation for thinking through what is to follow. Okay, points of orientation that'll lead us to think through. 1. The determination of the human essence is never an answer, but is essentially a question. The asking of this question is historical in the originary sense that this questioning first creates history. Yeah, because you'd have to go and past it. You'd have to look in the past to answer it. And even if you answered it an hour ago, that's in the past, and time is always moving, so you can never answer it. And because of that, well, maybe not answer it depending on the context and the year. It'll have a different definition, maybe. And slowly you will add on to it or expand it. And history's like, okay, I said something 5 seconds later, that's history. It's right now. Let's see. This is the case because the question of what the human being is can be asked only in question about being. Look at that. For only where being opens itself up in questioning does history happen, and with it that being of the human being by virtue of which the human being ventures the confrontation with beings as such. Beings as such. Human ventures. The human being. Venturing. 5. This questioning, confrontation first, brings humanity back to the being that it itself is and has to be. So when you start to question things, it helps bring humanity back to its motive in and of itself and what it has to be, so what essentially it is. 6. Humanity first comes to itself and is a self only as questioning historical. The selfhood of humanity means this: it has to transform the being that opens itself up into history, and thus bring itself to a stand. So the unfolding, the appearing. Selfhood does not mean that the human being is primarily an I and an individual. Humanity is not this any more than it is a we and a community. So humanity is more than just the ego, basically. Because humanity is itself as historical, the question about its own being must change from the form. What is the human being into the form? Who is the human being? What is the human being? Who is the human being? I see. What and who. Okay. What Parmenides' saying expresses is a determination of the human essence on the basis of the essence of being itself. Okay. He got very concise. But we still do not know how the human essence is determined here. So far, we have simply delineated the space into which the saying speaks. Delineated the space, huh? And which it first helps to open up by speaking into it. So you speak into it. That helps it open up. And by doing that even further, you delineate it. Yet this general indication is still not enough to set us free from the usual representations of humanity and from the typical manner in which it has been determined conceptually. In order to understand the saying and to grasp its truth, we must at least have an intimation of something positive about Greek Dasein and being. Greek Dasein and being. Something positive, huh? This is interesting. From the saying of Heraclitus, that we have cited several times, we know that the disjunction of gods and human happens only in polemos, in the confrontational setting of being. Only such struggle Eidexe points out, so that's spelled Edeixe, I don't know how to pronounce that in Greek, points out, it lets God and human beings step forth in their being. It's interesting how he's using the plural instead of the singular. Oh, maybe because Parmenides was Greek and a polytheist. Who is the human being? We do not learn this through a scholarly definition, but only when humanity steps into confrontation with beings. By attempting to bring them into their being, that is, sets beings into limits and form, projects something new, not yet present, originally poeticizes grounds poetically. Okay, let's break this down. So the human being can't be found by a scholarly definition. Instead, we can observe it when humanity steps into a mode of tension, even. Because if you're in confrontation, you're in tension. So when beings are in tension, and you attempt to bring them into their beingness, that'll help put in limits and form, and then it will be something new, but it's not yet completed, and it gives it ground and poetic essence, and that will help you figure out who is the human being. The thinking of Parmenides and Heraclitus is still poetic, and here this means philosophical, not scientific. But because in this poeticizing thinking has precedence, thinking about human being also requires its own direction and measure in order to clarify this poetic thinking sufficiently in terms of its proper counterpart. We will now interrogate a thinking poetry of the Greeks. Thinking poetry of the Greeks. like Virgil. This poetry is tragedy. I love tragedy. The poetry in which Greek being and Dasein, Dasein belonging to being, were authentically founded. Oh, those are such great genres. All right, Parmenides expressing determination via human essence, and that human essence is the essence of being itself.